And I have to admit to you that the duties of an honorary co-host are extremely light. But therefore I'm going to add to the consist really of introducing the two moderators. But I'm going to add to them slightly by saying just a word about one of the other organizers or sponsors of the conference, named the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which is to say anyone who has looked at the questions of conservatism, Christianity, and of social order in post-war Europe, and particularly in the last 30 or 40 years, knows what a tremendous debt we owe to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. It is extraordinarily influential and important, and it keeps alive the banners of faith and conservatism in a civilized way in Europe. And of course, that's right and proper because Konrad Adenauer was, I think, one of the greatest Christian statesmen in post-war Europe and indeed in the 20th century. In fact, you could remove the word Christian from that sentence and it would be equally true. He was one of the greatest of German statesmen. I think his only rival in the last century was Helmut Kohl. And we owe a great deal to Konrad Adenauer for the peace and prosperity of Europe and what he achieved. So I'd like to thank those sponsors. Now, let me now turn to my other very light duty, which is to introduce Eric Teetsel, the moderator of this session. Let me say that over lunch and before then, I've been very impressed at the conference by how many people there are who are either transatlantic in nature, being Americans who live and work in Europe, or Canadians who live and work in Europe, or Europeans who lived and worked in the United States, and indeed Europeans who've lived and worked throughout several European countries. I think it's added to the depth and interest of the discussion that this is the case, and this is a genuinely multinational, international gathering, and I think that it's going to, for that reason, be much more influential. Eric fully fits this category. He were you a military brat? He was a military brat, as the Americans call it. It's not an insult. Who was educated and brought up for 7 years in Europe, in 3 European countries. In more recent years in the United States, he played a part in developing the American Enterprise Institute, which is one of the most important, influential think tanks in the United States, and particularly working with Arthur Brooks, its new president. He is now the custodian of the Manhattan Declaration, a declaration of belief in faith and the family and other Christian virtues, which the famous Charles Colson, the late Charles Colson, established with people like Professor Robert George of Princeton, and which I think many, many thousands of people have signed as a declaration of their intention to live by and according to that declaration. So he's very well suited to superintend this distinguished panel, and I now hand over to Eric with thanks.
Thank you. You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You might like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. In America, the basic human right of free exercise of religion is articulated within the first clauses of the First Amendment to our Constitution. For this reason, it is often referred to as America's first freedom. However, such an understanding actually gets it backwards. Religious freedom isn't our first freedom merely because it's listed first. It's listed first because it is the foundation for all that comes after, including the freedoms of speech, press, and association. Religion is a universal human experience bound neither by time or place. As each of us ventures along in our quest to discover who or what to serve and how, our answers inevitably vary. Religious freedom, then, is the right to a different answer to those questions than your neighbors. And from this fundamental right flows the rights to talk about your answer and its ramifications for your life, what Christians call evangelism. To write about it, to gather with others who share it, what we call worship, and so on, all in service to your God. As previous speakers have said today, free people everywhere owe a debt to Europe and the United States for the unearthing and application of religious freedom as a fundamental human right. But, if I may borrow again from Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changin'. The alternative to religious freedom is to have the answers to life's biggest questions dictated to you by government. And if government can tell you what to believe, it can also instruct you on how to live, conforming the patterns of your life to its demands rather than the demands of your individual conscience. In this scenario, there's absolutely nothing government can't do, for it is God. And so we serve government in every way. The demands of the state, in sync with the prevailing ideologies of our time, pose a severe threat to religious freedom, from the ways we conduct business, to the education of our children, and even our worship of God. Like the biblical hero Joshua, we must choose this day whom we will serve. With me this afternoon are three preeminent scholars and practitioners who will discuss the threats to religious freedom in their own contexts. Each will have 8 minutes to cover their turf, and then we'll immediately jump to a period of question and answer. Going first will be Jennifer Marshall, who's the director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation. She's also my friend and someone from whom I've learned a great deal. I'm going to give a very short bio of each speaker. I will refer you to the packet for a complete list of their numerous accomplishments. Then we'll go with Rocco Buttiglione, who is a philosopher and politician, former member of the European Parliament and nominee for European Commissioner from Italy. And finally, Martin Kugler, co-founder of the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination against Christians in Vienna. Jennifer.
Well, I know there's some jet lag in the room, and there was some wine at lunch, so I think it's appropriate to stand and make sure we all stay awake. It is an honor to be here with such expertise in the room, such courage in the room, to be with panelists who have exhibited so much of this. That's a real honor and pleasure to be here, and I hope that my comments can serve you in the important work that you are doing here and around the world. Well, as Eric alluded to, the American founders believed that strong religious congregations and vibrant practice of faith was essential to ordered liberty. They designed the U.S. Constitution to respect religious liberty because they considered it the foundation of all other liberties. But today, in America, more and more power is being centralized in Washington, D.C., at our national government level. For example, many policies that affect local schools are now decided in Washington. And there is a centralized curriculum emerging called the Common Core. It will first coerce uniformity among public schools. But soon enough, it will force religious schools and homeschools to get on board as well. The power to define curriculum is the power to control education. And this is critical if we want to understand parental rights and the ability to raise children according to one's convictions. Well, because of this threat in the United States, many concerned parents who homeschool or send their children to a private or religious school are standing up against the Common Core because they want to retain the right to educate their children according to their convictions, not according to the predetermined political correctness that the government says will be mandated. As centralization gradually overcomes the Constitution's design in America, the national government has begun to restrict the freedom of religion. And that should concern all citizens, whether they are religious or not. One of the most sweeping centralizations of power in U.S. history has come about with President Obama's redesign of our healthcare system. The problems in the news lately about the website not working and millions of Americans losing their health care, those were not the first problems with Obamacare. They came long before. In fact, one of the very first rules issued under Obamacare was a requirement that nearly all insurance plans offer coverage of abortion-inducing drugs, contraception, and sterilization. Well, as you can imagine, many Americans object to having to support abortion-inducing drugs, and others object on religious grounds to contraception. Yet only formal houses of worship were omitted, exempted from this policy. Excuse me. Religious employers such as Catholic hospitals, Christian schools, faith-based soup kitchens, even family-owned businesses do not qualify for an exemption, and they will have to provide coverage for abortion-inducing drugs or face massive fines, up to a fine of $100 per day per employee. In case you don't want to do the math, that is crippling for companies if they would have to face those fines. More than 80 lawsuits have been filed by more than 200 plaintiffs in federal court because of this mandate under Obamacare. Just last week, the United States Supreme Court announced that it will take 2 of the cases on this issue. It will hear the cases in March, and it will decide them by the end of June. Religious freedom requires, and the court should uphold, the fact that government does not have the right to interfere with religious faith. It should not interfere with religious faith or the charitable works that faith inspires. Nor should the government tell a family that wants to run a business according to its convictions that they have to forfeit their conscience to do business. Government should not be allowed, for example, to coerce a Jewish deli to have to sell pork. That kind of coercion, however, is exactly what we are starting to see when it comes to convictions about marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Consider the case of evangelical photographer Elaine Kugler in the state of New Mexico. When a lesbian couple came to her and asked her to photograph their commitment ceremony, she declined to participate in that ceremony on the basis of her religious convictions. The couple found another photographer. They actually found a cheaper photographer, but they still decided to take Elaine Kugler to the Human Rights Commission in their state, and she was found guilty and fined for not having done the ceremony. Well, that wasn't the end of the story, however. Elaine very courageously decided to take her religious liberty claim to court, and the Alliance Defending Freedom, one of the premier legal institutions in the United States, has come to her aid, and they are pleading for religious liberty in court. Well, the New Mexico Supreme Court this summer decided against Elaine, and now that case is on appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and we expect to hear very soon whether they will take it in this term. Elsewhere in the United States, faith-based adoption and foster care providers who have been so pioneering in the field of providing for children in need, the orphans and the fatherless, they have been driven out of serving these needy children simply because they want to place them with a married mother and father. Massachusetts, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., for example, have insisted that these faith-based Asian policy or any other policy area. By imposing a judgment where it ought to respect religious liberty, the overreaching government threatens freedom not only for religious individuals and communities, but for all citizens. And that leads me to 2 conclusions for our action together. The first is, many of today's threats to religious liberty arise from the growth in the overreaching state. If we love religious freedom, we should be concerned about the size and the scope of government and the freedom of all citizens generally. And second, to protect religious freedom, we should urge all those who love freedom to join us, whether their cause is lower taxes or freedom from regulation or any kind of freedom. Freedom is at stake here. The debate is far from over. It's only just begun, and I'm so glad to be participating in a room full of those who have courageously stood and are defining how we use that freedom and what it is for. I look forward to discussing this with you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, Mr. Teetsel has omitted one important part of my curriculum. He did not say that I am Italian, that I am a professor. He did say that I am a politician. And you must know that Italians are a very talkative people. And professors, they could speak forever. And politicians, they are the worst of all. So I give you the right to interrupt me or rather, tell me 1 minute before speaker's time so that I can say a few words of conclusion. I would like to begin with a question that's been left open in the wonderful speech of my friend Wolkenstein. What is a post-secular society? I confess, I know it is a grievous sin, but I am a little bit familiar with the thought of Jürgen Habermas and with the debate on the post-secular society. Look, let us make one example. When I was a young man, one of my professors was Professor Norberto Bobbio. Bobbio was a very important representative of secularist culture in Italy, strongly anti-clerical, also anti-Catholic, and he was my professor. I remember the discussion that we had. I would not say that Bobbio was a moral relativist. He was not at all. He was a man of strong convictions, of firm beliefs, and he used to say, "You, Rocco, you are a Catholic. You must understand, we have a moral code that is stronger than yours, because you can go to the priest and he will forgive you. But we are judged by our conscience, and conscience never forgives." It was a kind of counter-ethics. There is a generation of people that have lived according to a code of moral conduct that was very similar to the Christian one, although it was not based on revelation, but they say on human reason, or on human nature, or on history. That was a secular society. Secularization is a word that was used for the first time, I think, in the 16th century, when the principalities, the ecclesiastical principalities in Germany, were seized by their governors and transformed in lay, secular principalities. And the properties of the church were sold or appropriated by the state. Secularization is the transformation of something that was something belonging to the church and something belonging to the state or sold to the general public. And as an analogy, the word was used to say that Christian values were defended, maintained, but grounded not in revelation, but either on nature or on history, or something else, but usually on nature, positivism, and on history, idealism. That is the society in which I grew up. My father was a secularist in this sense. He had the same code of conduct that I had, with small differences. Bobbio has remained a friend of mine throughout his life. He's dead now. And I could not say he's a moral relativist. I could say, you look a little bit like a Pharisee, because you can avoid all sins, but not the sin of pride. The pride of one who thinks he does not stand in need of salvation. But in any case, not a moral relativist. What is happening now? The world is changing. We have a new generation of people, a generation of people who do not preserve Christian values in a secular form. They are against Christian values. They are no more the same values. The idea is that everybody has the right to have his own values, quite independent of the values of others. As if each one of us could live in a world of his own. May I make a quotation from Heraclitus? Heraclitus has written, «Tu logo deotos xulud zeusi noi poloi al os idian econtes phronesin». A lot of people, they are foreign to reason, and they live as if each one of them had the reason of his own. Reason that does not stand in dialogue with the reason of the other, as if each one of them could live in a different world. And this brings you to a shift of meaning in some fundamental words. Let us take one fundamental word that has undergone such a shift of meaning in these last years. It is the word tolerance. They say that Voltaire has written that I am absolutely contrary to what you think, but I am ready to give my life in order to preserve your right of saying it. I do not agree. Only 2 minutes? 2. Now, by the way, the quotation is not really from Voltaire, never quoted, but it has been attributed to. Now, we are demanded to be not judgmental. You must not have judgment on what I do. Not you must tolerate that I act according to my conscience, even if my conscience tells me something that is different from what you think good. No, you have not the right of having a judgment. And we must live in a society in which no judgments are passed. But can we live in such a society? We live in one world. What each one of us does influences what the others do. And I have the right of telling you what I think. A free society is a society in which sinners can commit sin and pastors can say that sin is sin. And I have the duty of allow others to tell me they do not disagree with what I do. Here you have the dialogue, the common pursuit of truth. We are entering into a society in which it is forbidden. And it is forbidden to think in terms of a hierarchy of values, saying this is better than that. But men do think through a hierarchy of values. Without a hierarchy of values, we cannot think. And so we run the risk of losing the habit of thinking. One last remark. Can such a society survive for long? I have 4 daughters. I think that I have the right to educate my daughters and to transmit to them the values that I have found in my life. And I consider, of course, they have the right of doing what they think fit, not taking into account what I tell them, but I have the right to try to communicate to them my values. And what are my values? To a large, yesterday, it was my 41st anniversary of marriage. One important section of my values pertained to the fact that I fell in love with her mother, that we got married, that we had these children, and is linked to masculinity and femininity, the fact of being man and the fact of being woman, and the encounter of men and women, through which children are born. And I consider a success of my education the fact that my daughters are married. Well, one not yet, but she's very young. And have children, and they are good mothers. Can the state forbid me to communicate the stereotypes of masculinity and femininity? But if the stereotypes that are a large part of our culture are lost, if the idea of romantic love goes lost, will it not survive? We already are not having any children anymore. In 100 years, great cultures like Germany or Italy may disappear from the face of the earth. And it is the only way to save them, to communicate to the new generation those values that can bring people to give their life in order that their children may live, to reconstitute that atmosphere of community, of which also Fitzboggessner spoke at the end. And this atmosphere is strictly linked to the idea of religion, religare from the Latin, to keep people together. Think of Europe. Ralph Dahrendorf used to say, there is no European demos, no European people. And I told him once, no, of course there is no European people, but there was no people of Athens, and they constituted the people of Athens. How did they do that? Because they created a sanctuary. They have built up a sanctuary on the Isle of Athens. And through the veneration of the same gods, they have become one people. I think that we still may have hope. The day before yesterday, in Croatia, they have had a referendum on the Constitution, to write in the Constitution that the marriage is the union of a man and a woman. They won.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a big honor and challenge to talk after Rocco Buttiglione. When I told my friends in Vienna that I'm going to participate in a transatlantic dialogue, they thought that I'm going to join NSA. Hi Barrett, it's Angela. Yes, I know. Well, before I talk about growing threats and freedom of religion in Europe, I want to make a general remark. Dealing with challenges and threats of religion we face as Christians in today's Europe must not lead us to a strategy or feeling of victimization. When we do our work in Vienna, in the Observatory, we try to help or to contribute to a better understanding of religious freedom for all. Nowadays, the role of Christians in Western society seems to become more and more a role of advocacy for liberty and reason. This year we celebrate 1,700 years of the Edict of Milan, granting freedom of religion to the Roman Empire. By the Edict of Milan, Emperor Constantine grants freedom of religion, I quote, to Christians and others the full authority to observe that religion which each preferred, in order to promote peace and support the common good. And he meant that religious observance had to be, quote, free and open, without molestation and without any conditions. Today, in the west of Europe, my organization researched and documented in the past 6 years 1,000 cases of intolerance and discrimination against Christians. We documented hate crimes, hate incidents, acts of vandalism, negative stereotyping and exclusion, but we also looked on legal restrictions affecting Christians. You can view them easily in our website, and that's a very elaborate search tool as well. So what's going on in Europe? We do not speak of persecution, because persecution would create wrong images in people's heads. But we speak of intolerance if it's referring to the social dimension, and about discrimination if it's about legal limitations. May I show you a short video? Just as an illustration. Emperor Constantine dedicates a large part of his edict to securing places of assembly and worship. Today we see a rising number of attacks against such places. For example, 84% of vandalism in France was directed against Christians, and we have similar figures for other countries in Europe. And in this term, vandalism, of course, has not included other forms of violence. Speaking about France, for instance, the very violent behavior of the police towards the participants of the manifestation Manif pour tous this year. But this is not all. In a survey we did with the nunciatures of the European countries, we documented 41 laws which affect Christians in Western Europe, affecting adversely. We asked in this survey whether a Christian can wear a religious symbol in public or mention his or her faith in his working place, in a private conversation, whether Christians, medical doctors, other members of medical staff could be or are forced to do things they hold to be unethical, whether a Christian entrepreneur is forced to deliver services against his or her conscience, and whether Christian parents can or cannot opt their children out of mandatory sexual education. Of course, if it might stand in direct opposition to their convictions. Let me say a few words to each of these areas, or the most sensitive areas. First of all, of course, freedom of conscience. It affects not only medical staff, midwives, etc., but also registers of birth, marriages, and death. And it is very known that in, for instance, the United Kingdom, we have many problems in this area. Today it was mentioned that the Catholic agencies for adoption, which worked for more than 150 years very successfully in England, was forced to close because they were not ready to offer their services to same-sex couples. So we have the problem even in Ireland, when 2 months ago the new abortion bill forced a Roman Catholic hospital in Dublin to be on a list of 25 hospitals who are forced to offer abortion under certain conditions. Freedom of expression, it is right to criminalize speech when there is a clear and imminent danger that it causes violence. But to criticize Islam or homosexuality should not lead directly to criminal investigation. This is a problem for street preachers, this is a problem for Christian intellectuals participating in public debates. Then freedom of assembly and association, praying in front of abortion clinics are being outlawed in some countries. In Austria, last summer there were 35 pro-abortion activists arrested by police because of violent behavior in such a place. Regarding parental rights, there needs to be a possibility to opt out, and this is not possible in countries where homeschooling is forbidden, like Germany, Croatia. I got 1 minute more because of that. And then last but not least, discriminatory equality policies. What does it mean? In the area of hiring, it is not possible to discriminate against religion or sexual orientation. Generally, that makes sense. But when an Austrian bishop, a Protestant bishop, wanted to hire a secretary, he was told that he was not allowed to refuse a headscarf-wearing Muslim. At this place, I want to welcome special guests, a couple from the United Kingdom, Peter and Hazel Mary Bull, who were in the focus of such legislation because they had run for decades a family-friendly bed and breakfast, and when they felt uneasy to have the same-sex couple in their marriage double bedroom, they were sued and put to court, etc. So let me here welcome with this applause Hazel Marie and Peter Bull. So where do we go from here? I think we have to go a step beyond the law. Famous Jewish law professor Joseph Weiler said that European Christians were forced into a ghetto by the European secularists, but he added then that Christians built up another wall inside the ghetto to be completely safe. I asked him for what he thinks the ways out of these ghettos, and he said, communicate that faith is not merely private, that faith is not separated from reason, that there are mysterious and unanswerable topics in life, and last but not least, in Europe, he told us, we need to see many strollers at the church entrance every Sunday. Baroness Saida Warsi, Britain's first female Muslim cabinet minister and now senior state minister, said, Europe needs to become more confident in its Christianity. I see in Europe faith is overlooked in the public sphere, with not even a word about Christianity in the preface of the European Constitution. And the quote ends with, our response to militant secularization today has to be simple, holding firm in our faith, holding back intolerance, Politicians need to give faith a seat at the table in public life. And this is obviously the opposite of what secularists mainstream tells us. They say, believe what you want as long as you don't behave like you believe. This is maybe, as long as you don't practice your belief, you have no problem. We have to face and to overcome these tendencies to privatize religious behavior and convictions. Ladies and gentlemen, let us bring many Buttigliones to the political stage again. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move to a time of Q&A. I'm sure there are many questions in the room. We just ask if you have a question, if you can stand and introduce yourself and keep your speech to the form of a question. That would be helpful. Before we get going, as you're thinking, I'd like to start by asking the panel to talk a little bit more about threats to religious freedom in the form of regulations on education. This is something that each of our speakers talked about. A few of you mentioned having children come before the United States, and there are numerous examples of parents in Sweden and in Germany whose right to educate their children has been infringed. Is it too simple to say that these are occurring absolutely because the state does not want parents to teach their kids Christian values? Is that an oversimplification, or does that get to the core of it? Open. Anyone? Yes.
I tell you what's taking place in some parts of Italy now. There are some of us who were born out of wedlock. Poor children. Why should we give them the impression that they are different from others? Let us forbid that in all public documents, father and mother be named as father and mother. And so that if they happen to have two fathers or two mothers, they don't remark the difference. I ask you, is this correct? Or is not education about the capacity of becoming fathers and mothers? Can we sever the transmission of values from the transmission of societal roles, paternity and maternity? And does it impinge upon my right of education to my children the fact that they are not allowed to be considered in the school as the children of my wife and of me? Here is one example. Let us make another example. We are invited to consider sexual roles as something that is meaningless. Each one chooses for himself a sexual role. Thousands of years of cultural elaboration that are linked to the identification of sexual roles and introduced us in the world of symbolism, in the world of culture, should be cancelled. How can we teach to the children to read the Divine Comedy if in the Divine Comedy you cannot stress the fact that Beatrice is a woman and that is a male? Another example. We should teach non-considering religion, setting apart religion. How can I teach my students to read Moby Dick? You remember at the beginning of Moby Dick, call me Ismail. And if they don't know who is Ismail, if they have never read the Bible and never explained to them that Ismail is the lost brother of Isaac. And you remember how Moby Dick ends. And only I was left to tell it thee. How can they understand if they don't know the story of Job? These are the words of the servants who come to Job to tell him that his children have been slaughtered and his home has been destroyed and his cattle has been taken away by the Amalekites. Yes, the Amalekites. How can we? attempt to eradicate education from the tradition of which education is an expression is the destruction not only of the rights of parents, but of all of our culture. Very good what Walker said. We are ashamed of our culture.
In the United States, the challenges have come in two avenues. The first, parents for the last several decades, and prior to that as well, but in particular the movements in the last few decades in the United States to expand the rights of homeschooling and private and religious education have been quite successful. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, for example, in the United States, has been very effective at advancing the liberties of parents to be able to oversee the upbringing of their children by homeschooling. Parental choice in education through vouchers, through tax credits, through other mechanisms has had a great amount of success and is popular among religious and non-religious parents. So people seek that kind of choice, that kind of freedom from the state school system for a variety of reasons. They may do it for academic quality, they may do it for safety reasons, and they often do it for values reasons. So that's one category where there has always been an assault by the state on that erosion of the government monopoly on education. But in the United States, we've been quite successful to protect against that and advance freedom for parents. But a second kind of attempt is coming. This is what I tried to characterize in my remarks earlier, and that is the coercive uniformity, forcing all schools to do the same thing, whether it's in their hiring or in their curriculum or in their testing and so on. And as we have consolidated more authority for making education policy in our national government, rather than in the states and local governments where it historically has rested, we have seen more coercion towards uniformity, and as we come to this moment in time where there is a particular clash over whether we will have the freedom to maintain ideas and beliefs about the truth of marriage as the union of a man and a woman, sexual relations reserved for marriage properly, are those views going to be permissible in the public square, in polite society? That will, the tools that have been created to coerce uniformity in our school systems will be used then as well against homeschooling and private schooling. So I think we have to be conscious and moving on those two fronts at the same time and anticipating the challenges that will come in each.
Check if you have questions.
Yes, questions before in the back.
Okay, stand up. Introduce yourself. Hi, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to ask a question. And I'd like to thank you for your film, which was quite emotive. Some of those messages were obviously quite offensive. And I think it's important to remember that people do have the right to freedom of expression on both sides of the debate. So whether it's anti-abortionists or people who are protesting against religious observance, people do have the right to freedom of expression. It's the violence and the vandalism that are the criminal acts. And I think it's useful perhaps if we remember that religious liberty doesn't give us the right to subject other people who don't share our faith to unfair or unfavourable treatment. I mean, if the lady with the headscarf is the best person for the job, then is it really fair to exclude her? Surely we ought to be demonstrating tolerance towards all kinds of people. You know, when Jesus saw the woman at the well, he didn't say, well, you're not my kind. And I just wonder, you know, obviously we're seeking for a voice in a democratic process. And the lady from the States talking about the provision of access to contraception, safe termination of pregnancy, access to healthcare. These are all legitimate social policy objectives of a democratically elected government. And if this is about increasing the voice in the public sphere, then my question is, how can we ensure that our dialogue is relevant to the real key issues? You know, in a Europe in 2013, where in my country, the United Kingdom, 1 in 5 people are now in poverty. We now have the Red Cross handing out food parcels for the first time since the Second World War. There will be 60,000 people relying on food banks this Christmas, 20,000 children. You know, I just wonder whether, in terms of seeking a voice on issues like, you know, where the government should focus on in education and healthcare, we might also, this is my question, how we can ensure that we also dialogue on issues such as poverty, where people, you know, really, I think, do need to see Christian values in action. So thanks.
I think this is largely a question for Martin, but I'd like to clear up something regarding the mandate that I discussed, because I think the perception may not have gotten across correctly. The mandate under Obamacare is not about access to contraception. There is rampant access across the United States to abortion, to contraception, etc. The mandate is whether employers who currently subsidize their employees' health care will have to subsidize practices with which they disagree. And we're talking about Catholic hospitals, we're talking about Christian schools, people who have a mission-oriented, religious belief-based objection to that. That is the question. Are we going to coerce violation of conscience? That's the question. And I would say, yes, we are looking for religious liberty for all, absolutely. But we also want to protect against coercion against conscience.
I'm not sure if I understood all the details of the question, but I think it's useful to add two remarks. One is that in the work we try to do, we don't look for privileges for Christians. We want equal rights. We want to find or to contribute to a reasonable accommodation of religious people, all denominations, with the secular mainstream. This is besides what the Council of Europe asked in the document, thanks to the work of Luca Volonté, who is among us, when the Council of Europe says we need to accommodate religious beliefs with society. It's about liberty of expression for everybody, but of course, beyond certain limits. And I think the problem in Europe, in some countries with a traditional, maybe early church and marriage between throne and altar in the 19th, 18th century, that there is now a very anachronistic, very, very overdoing reaction of liberal intellectuals. So to say, don't, to Christians, address to us, don't ask too much about your rights because your ancestors behaved very badly, so shut up, yeah? Now it's our turn, huh? Don't be too much requesting your freedom. I think maybe it's a bit like a cartoon, but I often realize this talking to journalists that they have this inner ressentiment, and therefore it's very important to underline we don't ask for privileges. Yeah? It's about fundamental rights.
I would like to return just briefly to the poverty aspect of that question and assure that the reason we stand for marriage, I hope this is true of everyone in this room, speaking for my organization in the United States, the reason that we stand for marriage as the union of one man and one woman is out of the interest for our neighbor, our care and concern for the welfare of our children in our nation. And long before there was a debate about the definition of marriage, there was a debate about the fact that those children who were in poverty were often in poverty because of the absence of a father. And so we had a large debate in the 1990s in the United States about why so many people dependent on welfare and needing help and support from the state. There was a connection between that and the breakdown of marriage. Marriage reduces the probability of child poverty by 80% in the United States. We have got to be talking about that, and in interest for the welfare of our neighbor, be lifting up this institution and doing everything we can to make it more strong and stable.
My name is François Jacob. I'm just back from the US, but I'm a French citizen, and I want to ask a very short question. There's something interesting in the US, in my experience. I want to bring the question of immigration, and the largely immigration to the US has come from every country, but recently it's from the Latin countries, Latin America, and most of them are Christian Catholics. A challenge we have in Europe, and I'm really not a far-right person, but it's definitely the challenge posed by population from the immigration, and because of Islam. And with all respect for the religion, but I think it's a new thing. Sometimes we talk about religious liberty, and I hear this talks also, and I heard it in the US, that the French law on of laïcité on the scarf was amazing, and I actually do believe it's definitely not a good answer. But in a civilization, in my experience, unlike the US, where now it's true, like Fritz Wolkenstein said, we have not in the past, but now a cohabitation of religion. Recently there was a case where daycare in France was confirmed by the law because they fired someone who was wearing a scarf. And you have different types of scarves, so we can discuss it. But I want to ask the question, what is the right balance when you talk about freedom of religion and you don't have this common ground of Judeo-Christian understanding? Because as Christians, we also were the first believers in the certain universality of truth or values. And so now when we oppose some challenge by other religion, some of them, the tendency to not maybe at least agree with some of our views, how do you strike a balance at the policy level for such a case like the daycare, when someone wears a scarf and it hides her identity, or like, I want to talk about these maybe rare cases, but it's important.
Well, on the problem of the scarves, I don't see any reason why we should forbid women to go around with a scarf, unless it becomes impossible to identify them. If they want to be dressed in one way, well, it is just a matter of their, it is none of my business, unless they cannot be identified, or I have the legitimate suspicion that they are compelled to carry that kind of vestment against the rules. There are the two reasons why I can enter into such an individual problem like which kind of scarf a girl should have. That there is another question that goes more in depth. We know, I am known for being politically incorrect, so I beg your pardon, I shall be politically incorrect once again. All men are equal, or at least are born equal, but not all cultures are similar. We know that some cultures can more easily be integrated into our societies. We know, for instance, that if you take the rate of criminality as an index of the integration, we know that people from the Philippines have a very low rate of criminality. We know that people coming from other countries have a very high rate of criminality. And it results that those that have the highest rate of criminality come from North African states in Italy. I shall not say that this is because of Islam, but this is a matter of fact. Are we allowed to have legislations that favor immigration from countries whose citizens can be more easily integrated? The reasons are, we could investigate the reasons. The reasons have very much to do with women. Women control men much better than police. The Philippines, yes, that's the truth. The Philippines have 53 women to 47 men, and they are very well controlled. Some North African countries have 93 males to 7 females. Why don't they take their females with them? It is an issue. Perhaps because of our law, that is a wrong law that does not favor the reconstruction of families, but also because they do not want to have the women with them, because they consider our environment as unfavorable for the kind of character they want their women to preserve. I don't know why, but it is a matter of fact. And there is one fundamental issue of our immigration policies. Can we As a matter of fact, we already do, because we say that those who come from a country that is a member of the European Union can enter without limits. And what is the reason? Because we think that they are more integrated.
Martin, did you have anything you wanted to add on this question? If I may, Francois, when I was at AEI, we had a saying, the competition of ideas is fundamental to a free society. And on our next panel, Father Sirico will be discussing the question of competition as it relates to the market and arguing, I'm sure, that it's good for economic flourishing as well. I would argue that religious competition is good for human flourishing, for society, and that when we are forced to be on our best behavior and to make the most compelling arguments and to evangelize on behalf of our faith, we are at our best. And for what that's worth, as it relates to immigration, I think it's a healthy thing. We may have time for one last question. I think someone is right. Yes, sir. Here. Do we have a microphone?
Well, one last question. My name is Greg Pilkington. I'm obviously from the States. My question is for Ms. Marshall. I'm curious, when the Heritage Foundation first introduced universal health care, it was a very good idea. My question specifically, though, and this is kind of along the lines of what we were talking about with immigration policy, which initially the Heritage Foundation thought was a very good idea in the U.S. and promoted more immigration. But now, after having lived in Europe for 13 years, I confess maybe I've become a little more socialized, as it were. And does my employer really have the right to know what I spend money for medical expenses on?
Again, I want to correct the misperception. That is that what is at issue is not how an employee spends their healthcare money. They can spend their healthcare dollars any way they want. The question is, how is the employer going to spend the employer's dollars? Benefit packages in the United States are part of the contract situation that is negotiated at the beginning of anybody's term of service with a particular employer. It's well known that people have different benefits packages and that the benefits packages will often reflect the values and mission of the employer. So it would be completely in continuation of that system to have an understanding that a new kind of mandate that coerces employers to have to subsidize something that they have not before, that is very easily available but through other means. This would not be consistent with our understanding of religious liberty, where the government needs to prove a compelling interest that it can be achieved, that a common good can be achieved through no other means if they are going to erode the religious liberty of individuals and institutions. I